going to get ready for the talk, so if you're in a good position, otherwise please go to a better seat. All right, so welcome again to MIDOTNET. This is the most people we've had in quite a while, so thank you for being here and thank you for attending. Tonight we're going to have Mike, and at the end I will give you a little bit of teaser for the MI Tech Conference that's going to be happening in March. So Mike.
Awesome, thanks Dustin. Can people in the back hear me right now? Okay, great, awesome. So yeah, thanks for your inviting me. Thanks everybody for coming. It's great to see a crowd. It's been a while since I've been at an at-person event that had this many people. So it's awesome to see everybody. I'm gonna start out. So my name's Mike Onslow. I work for a company named Clarity Voice. We're about a mile from here. Been working there probably for about 10 years in the communication space. Probably in the last 5-ish years, I've gotten into being interested in AI, right? Especially, I'd say, what I'm going to call generative AI, right? When that came into the space, I said, wow, what we've been doing with predictive analytics and computer vision is pretty exciting. And I see a really lot of opportunity, right? And obviously, it isn't perfect, right? But it's getting better every day. So with generative AI. So started a podcast with a friend of mine that I've known for years. So it's called Artificial Antics. It's a podcast if anybody is interested in that. And really it's AI for the every person, right? Like we're not getting deeply technical. We may go through a tool or something like that, but a lot of times we're just having candid conversations with people, and it's not all roses, right? Like we realize that there's a lot of room for improvement with AI, so we really want to let people know like what's hype, what's not, right? So that's the podcast, and then I've got my stuff linked in here. There is a GitHub that I posted in the event page. And so feel free to follow along with that. I will tell you I'm going to stray off of that a little bit because I designed that this probably about 6 months ago, and obviously in this space a lot changes, right? So I'm also going to mention that the demo that I had, even though it was working, I've got like 3 or 4 demos. The main one, which is just ChatGPT's custom GPT that I reach out to an API that transcribes an audio file. Was working great the last 2 days, even last night. And of course, this stuff, they're changing the front end. So for some reason that isn't working, but that's okay. We're gonna jump into, I'll show you that really quick and how it's supposed to work. And then we'll actually look at building out an assistant using OpenAI's platform. And then also, I'm just gonna show you like the basic example of how you can essentially build an assistant without using the assistant's API. A lot of times you don't need RAG, which is Retrieval Augmented Generation. You really just need a really good system prompt. So we're gonna walk through that as well. Before I go too deep into this, is there anybody here who doesn't know what OpenAI and ChatGPT is? Any hands? Perfect, great. Okay, is there anybody here who's not familiar with like what a custom GPT is? Okay, that's fine. Maybe one that's on the edge. That's cool. So some of this is going to be what I'm going to call like super rudimentary. I'm going to go through 4 examples of custom GPTs that I just built in ChatGPT for various things, and then we'll jump over to that assistant side. So the first thing that I'm going to show you, one main note is that ChatGPT has changed since I designed this originally. It used to just be a plus account or a team account would allow you to create GPTs. Now anybody can create GPTs. The problem that I see with not having a plus account or a team account is, and obviously nothing is guaranteed overall, but there are some different guarantees about the privacy if you're using ChatGPT Team or ChatGPT Plus, where you can turn off the training. The free version is kind of like super wide open, and if you really want your stuff to stay within your own space, I actually suggest let's call it more self-hosted stuff, like even if it's Hugging Face or AWS, right? You can host these models, and especially with models like Llama, right? There's a lot of open source options that didn't exist so much even a year and a half ago, right? So this is ChatGPT, and this was the tool that I built. I don't know. This was probably a year and a half ago, and all this tool did. Give me a second. Yep, is you could take a URL, and you could paste it in. And I'll just start a new chat. And again, this probably isn't going to work. I mean, unless the ChatGPT gods are smiling on me. But for some reason, I haven't changed anything, and it was working last night, and for some reason, it's not working today. So you take in a URL. It goes out to a service called Deepgram, which does transcription. There are other services that do transcription, but this is speech to text, right? Taking an audio file and making a transcription out of it. And then the next step of the tool is really based on however you want to guide it, building out what I'm going to call a call coach report or a quality assurance report. And so I'll kind of show you how I built this here. So I made up a fictitious company. This is, half full bottling company, call coach. And the first piece of an assistant or a custom GPT, as probably most people know here, but I'm going to say it again, is just instructions, right? And this is, you can actually mimic the instructions piece of this with the system prompt in regular ChatGPT too, right? System prompt is the very first prompt that you put in. It will continue to be used further down the line. So, and I'll show you how to differentiate that when we make an assistant, we'll actually go through and we'll define the system prompt there as well. But, I say, hey, you're a helpful call center coach. I'm not going to read this verbatim, right? But there are some things that I've defined in here. I'll try and make this a little bigger just for the people in the back here. But, I'm going through, I'm saying, hey, you're assessing calls for Acme Communications Support Team. You have a high level of emotional intelligence, right? So you're really just guiding this custom GPT and telling it its place in the world so that it doesn't have the context of like every single person or thing ever, right? You want to really get that context down to this is what I want my tool to do, and these are the constraints that you're working within. As folks probably know, with generative AI, it's what's called non-deterministic, which basically means deterministic is you put the same inputs in and you're going to get the exact same outputs. Generative AI isn't like that, right? Like we know that we could run the same prompt over and 3 times and it's going to be maybe slightly different, right? So with that, there's some strategies that we could talk about if we have time at the end on how to sort of guide that back to center, right? If you're getting inconsistent results. So I've got some things that I've defined here as important. So I'm saying, always double check your work. In your knowledge, there are examples of where you have done your job well and where you have not, right? And you can add, I'm going to get to it next, what are called knowledge files, right? And these are files that are going to be available to this custom GPT. You could also do this with an assistant. As it runs, it can reference those when it needs to. So, and you could specifically tell it, hey, reference this file, right? So I'm, standard input is the transcript of a call, and then the standard output, right? Here I'm actually telling it, I want an HTML file that includes Tailwind CSS from the CDN. So I actually can get a report that I can show you kind of like what this looks like. So like this, right? So this is an assessment that is the output of this tool, right? And so, that particular call that I ran through, the 2 speakers were Tom, this was the agent that was working at the company, and Beth Idle, because she actually said her name during the call, and he said his name during the call, right? So, we've got the sentiment here, empathetic and professional from our agent, frustrated and disappointed. Beth was very frustrated and disappointed. Like if the call is in there and you can actually listen to it in GitHub, I highly suggest you go through it. It's probably like a 4-minute call or something. And it's really interesting. It's an example from Deepgram, but I think it hits the mark of like when people are just going to be, for lack of a better word, pissed off sometimes, right? And it's how our agents are navigating. So I came up with this idea, just a little bit of backstory. I came up with this idea in the first place because I work for a communications company and I said, gosh, it would be really nice if we can analyze our own calls because I knew the technology was there. And so at Clarity, I've actually built this out with a really nice UI based on our quality assurance template. And then for our customers, we're working with a few franchise brands where I'm helping them sort of define like, hey, what's your operations manual? We can put that in there and then we can use this and you can assess calls, right? And so that's been a real hit. both at Clarity and then for now we're starting to introduce this to customers. So that's kind of where the idea came from. I said, man, it takes a long time to listen to calls, and even if you have a transcript, I mean, it's long, right? Like it's a lot to read. So how can we figure out a way to like get this, to narrow this down to like, hey, let's figure out which calls they really need to assess and which ones they don't, the agent did great. So so that's kind of where this came about. So one of the things that we have at Clarity are core values, right? And I think we have 6 core values. So I've actually added in there in the custom GPT, part of its knowledge is, hey, these are the core values, and here is what it means to really exhibit, right, that core value. So part of this is, hey, show us where the agent exhibited those core values, like which ones and how they exhibited that, right? So that's here, right? Continuous improvement, integrity, customer focus. These aren't clarities, but these are example core values, right? And it's talking about, hey, integrity. The agent was honest about the limitations of the older device and offered transparent cancellation process. I've listened to the call. That's exactly what happened, right? So areas for improvement and goals, right? So this is another thing where it's like, hey, let's talk about what you did great on the call. Let's lead with that. And then let's figure out where are those areas for improvement, right? So this kind of goes through that. And then we have this is a much smaller version than the Clarity has, but we have a quality assurance checklist, right? Did they do this? Did they do that? Sometimes that's going to be NA, like it didn't apply to that call. And the UI that I built out at Clarity, it actually, just using emojis, right? It's got like X if they didn't do it and a green check if they did it. So it's really kind of cool. And it even has like the hyphen if it didn't apply to that call. So this can get really granular without a whole lot of work on my part, right? Like I didn't have to do a whole bunch to program a bunch of different cases. I just had to lightly guide it where I wanted it to go. And with generative AI, it makes it a lot more like, hey, I can define a theme. Let's detect the theme, right? And something I don't have in here, but I recently added to ours are red flags, right? Hey, they're talking about moving vendors. They're talking about the pricing is high, whatever. And I looked today and I'm like, only about like 0.05 or 0.5% of our calls get red flags, but when they do, we're automatically pushing them to the group that needs to respond to those people and say, hey, let's talk about price or let's talk about this, right? So you're able to sort of detect things that I think in the past it would have been a lot harder to detect with algorithmic programming, right? Where you've got to detect keywords and this and that. Generative AI sort of says, hey, let me know when they're talking about pricing negatively. Let me know when they're talking about the company negatively. And so it's just a really nice way to program to develop. So that is a call report. I'm going to go back over here. So those are instructions. Does anybody have questions about instructions in any way? Like, feel free. I probably have 30 minutes of content, so there's lots of question and answer time.
One of the things that use a temperature value of 0.0, are there a predefined set, like list of parameters you can say, or did you just say that?
Just said it. So that's a great question. And here the answer is, I just happen to know that a temperature of 0.0 is going to be very precise and not imaginative at all. And 1.0 on the other end of the spectrum is going to be, hey, let's create some stuff, right? And I don't really want it to make crap up, right? Like I want this to be, hey, what actually happened on this call, right? Now, I'll show you a little later when I build out the assistant using the API, you can set the temperature right there. So I don't have to say it in my instruction. It's just, there's a little a knob you can turn basically, and you can just set it to what you want. As well as like top P and a couple of other values, which don't ask me too much about those. Like I always get that stuff mixed up. So that's a good question. Any other question about, yes?
Have you noticed any performance difference if you put the instructions at the end of the prompt versus, I imagine this gets inserted at the beginning somewhere?
No. What I do to differentiate, if I want something to like, hey, make sure you do this, I just label it with important. So important is what I put, like in all capital, important, always do these things. Because the instructions here, I'll open them up again. This is a short version of instructions. I have ones that are a lot longer than this. And here's a tip, I usually like to build these out in Markdown So you're using, like the single, hash for an H1, right? So it understands the structure of that prompt, and it can understand then, okay, here are my inputs, right? Here are my outputs. And so that's definitely helpful. So if you're looking at positioning and where things would go, I'd say it's better if you structure it in Markdown, and it really understands that very well, right? Like you could do it in JSON too, but that'd be super hard to read. I don't think that's necessary. But yes, Godfrey.
The most boring job in the entire universe is call center managers who have to listen to all these calls. Not as boring as crap as it usually is. But how often does it get it wrong?
How often does it get run?
Does it get it wrong?
Oh, does it get it wrong? So there are cases where it's going to get it wrong, or because it's just inferring, right? It's interpreting, and it's honestly it's correct most of the time, Godfrey. It's in the nuanced pieces where we're not using like tonal sentiment. We're just using transcription, and then we're running the transcript through here. So it can't sometimes detect the customer or the agent's tone, like how they were speaking. It's just going by the words that were said. So sometimes if there's nuance in the words that might reflect better in the tone, it can miss that, right? Because it doesn't have that context. Yes, Honorio, real quick, sorry. I'll get to everybody. Yeah.
How do you give it feedback?
What do you mean by that exactly?
I mean, I thought RAG was like give it feedback and that makes it better.
Okay, so yes, you can do that.
Interpret it right or no, you interpret it right.
Yeah, so for that, what I would do is I would encapsulate, hey, in a file of its own, here's an example of an output that you did where you nailed it. And I would just put at the top, I would label it. This is an example where you did a great job on this call analysis. Then if I had a negative one, I would do the same thing, right? So the one limitation I will say about at least the ChatGPT version of this is that you can only upload 20 files. And sometimes that might not cut it, right? So what you would do is a suggestion there, if you wanted to do what Honorio said, is you could just take a text file and give it example, you did great, boom, example. Next one, with maybe some hyphens, right, to just differentiate. So you can encapsulate a bunch of that feedback, right, that I'm gonna call it fine tuning. It's not exactly what it is, but I'm gonna call it fine tuning for lack of a better set of words. And that's how you could do that. So yes, you could do that. And yes, I have done that. I don't have that in this example, but that's a good question. But RAG in general, right, is just you're giving it a set of files. It's going to vectorize those files, and then it can lean on those files based on the outputs and where, in its inference, does it need a file? Does it need that file? And you could tell it in the instructions, use that file every time, right? But if you're going to do that, what I found is actually better is just embedding that information in the instructions, right? So unless it's really long. You had a question.
I think it's a different form of the same type of
Yeah, you can actually, there are a couple of different ways to approach this. So for one, Deepgram, which is where I'm transcribing, also will do sentiment with a confidence level. So if I really want to make sure that it's, and this is how we do it at Clarity, like we're using Deepgram and using sentiments, intents, topics, like all that stuff pre this, so that when we get here, it's loaded with information about the confidence levels of that. It's pretty darn sure where things went off the rails or didn't, right? So, but in your prompt, you can ask it to generate and use its own confidence level or a confidence score, let's call it, right in the custom instruction. I'm not doing it here, but you can absolutely do that. That's kind of the same idea of like double check your work, right? Or this is very important. Like you could just tell it kind of like those human words and stress importance where it needs to be stressed, and it'll generally do a pretty good job of taking that guidance. Did that answer your question? Okay. And then I think you had another question?
That pretty much answered it. I was going to ask how when you're troubleshooting, because it doesn't look like you see the API response.
Right, that's right.
Know where the error comes in, if it was a bad transcription or a bad.
Yeah, and even the debugger, so that's a good point. Like even when I tried to use the debugger this morning when it was like not working, last night it was working to this morning it was working, it doesn't give you much, right? Like it'll give you, if your off fails, it's pretty good at telling you, hey, you got an off failure, right? But it doesn't give you that like raw output in every case, even if you're using, you know, because when you're building out the custom GPT in ChatGPT's interface, there is, and I'll show you, actually I could show you this now. This is down in actions. Actions are where you're going to hit external tools and APIs. So this is the Deepgram action that I've developed or designed. And we can actually do, if you scroll down, you can run a test on this. And so what I can do is I can go take my URL and we could put this URL here and we can actually, I believe, hit test and it'll yeah. So it first tries to search its knowledge. It doesn't find that. It's telling me to provide a URL and I'm going to give it that now. And so here, so this is the debug version, right? But you'll see in a second here, it does show me what I'm doing, you know, what I'm calling. Oh, sweet. Okay, great. It's now working, folks. Like this literally is now working, right? It actually runs. Cool. So this is using something called ChatGPT's Canvas. I heard somebody talking about it earlier. This is kind of like their, hey, it'll give you an output and you can edit the output in line. But yeah, so this is going to create me my file, and it's going to be very similar to those other files. And so I'll hit update here, and we'll just do it live because why not, right? It worked, so of course it's going to work again. Doubt it, but you never. You know what? Glass is half full here, right? This is the half full bottling company. So all right, so I'm going to give this a try. So hey, we're going to take it from the top, right? We're going to put our thing in. Our URL, it's gonna do this. It's gonna say, hey, I need to hit Deepgram, cool. Error talking to connector. I don't know what's up. Most of the time my debug tests were failing too. I'm just not sure what's up here, right? And I know Deepgram has, I've never seen Deepgram go down for me. Like every time I hit it, it just works, right? So I'm not sure what's going on here. And this link is definitely publicly accessible, so it's not that either. But as you saw, right, it generated that HTML, and that's the report that I showed, this one here, right? That's going to be that HTML is going to print something very similar to what's in this report, right? Same call. It's non-deterministic, but it's going to generally be similar with similar inputs. So let's go back here. And I'm going to go back into editing my GPT. And we talked briefly a little bit about knowledge. So in my knowledge files, this is where we can upload up to 20 files. It accepts most standard file formats, right? You could do text, you could do CSV. There's a whole, and it's in my GitHub repository that kind of walks you through. CSVs, it allows for really massive CSVs to be in the knowledge file. But a lot of like other files that you could upload are limited, right, to 512 megs or whatever it is. Different files have different limitations, and those are well documented on OpenAI's documentation. So yeah, so these are knowledge files. So yeah, this is just me uploading a file, and I have a couple different things here that I could upload, but I already uploaded them, right? So this is my quality assurance guidance. And I'll actually open this file. This should also be in the repository. But yeah, this is just the quality assurance guidance, right, is really a checklist, right? So it's, did they say this? Did they do that? Did they follow these operational things that we do at our company, right? So, and then the core values are just, each core value, and these examples are in the GitHub as well. And in how to understand if somebody exhibited that based on their actions, right? Okay, so any questions on knowledge files, right? So we've done instructions, and now we're in knowledge files. Any questions on knowledge files that we haven't covered? Yes, absolutely. Yep, it's being vectorized. So both in this version, which lives on ChatGPT, and in the OpenAI like API assistance, it vectorizes it. In the API, I'll show you, it'll actually create a vector store, and you can access that store even outside of your assistant. So yes, the files are definitely vectorized. Yep.
How about the number of tokens? For example, if your file or your
Yeah.
file is really big, would it and it hits the limit?
So what he's asking is, hey, if a file is really massive, maybe it's going out of context, right? So that's kind of one of the things that RAG is helpful with. It can go in, it can dip into those files without, like, just for a little piece of logic, come back out and keep the same context window, right? So I believe that's how it works, right?
So when it hits your the web reader.
Yeah, the transcriber. Yep. Now that's a great question. And so what he just asked was, hey, it's hitting an API. We don't know how much data comes back from the API. That's a total limitation of this, and that's why I don't really use this nearly as much as I used to. I mostly use the API because I could program around, hey, that transcript was of a 2-hour call, right? A 2-hour call is gonna blow, like it won't even, it'll just say, nah, we can't do that, right? You gave us too much data. So I hit that limitation very, very shortly after first making this, which is why I moved over to like, hey, I can program, which then I can break things up a little bit more, and I can use multiple, if I need to, I could use multiple prompts, right? Or even something like LangChain and cover what you're talking about there, which is just a very real context window hit, right? Which it's going to be limited. So I've run into that with the transcript. So yes, whatever API you're hitting, sometimes like if I wanted to go really deep with this, I would actually wrap, and this is how I'm doing it programmatically. I've got an API wrapping Deepgram, and all of the metadata and all the stuff I don't care about at all, I drop it before I pass it back into the assistant because it's just a waste of space, right? So a lot of times you can build like instead of me reaching out to Deepgram here, I could just reach out to my own API, which wraps Deepgram and maybe just gives me just the transcript version or data, right? So that's one strategy to get around what you're talking about. Totally very real thing. Hit it the first 30 minutes of messing with this a year and a half ago. So, yep. Any other thoughts or questions about knowledge files? Okay. All right, so we'll move on to capabilities. So this has evolved over time. I think when I built the tutorial, we had web search, we had DALL-E image generation, and we had code interpreter and data analysis. So what I do, this actually doesn't need web search, right? I could actually turn this off because all of the data about how to analyze a call is within my tool, right? I have my knowledge, I have my quality assurance stuff. So I can actually turn this off. I whipped this up, a few days ago, and so I don't really need that. And Canvas kind of annoyed me when it came up. Like it was like, okay, I could only see a little bit of my HTML. That's annoying. So I'd turn that off. But it's good to know that in making a custom GPT, you could have it go search the web. There are custom GPTs I've made for our team that do search the web, right? We want to do data enrichment or whatever it is, right? So that can be helpful. Canvas is, hey, do you want that Canvas user interface to be part of your custom GPT, your tool, right? And then DALL-E image generation, this is, hey, do you want, is your tool gonna maybe need to generate images from time to time? This doesn't need to do that. So, and most of the things I make don't generate images, right? So, these are capabilities. And then code interpreter and data analysis. For almost everything I do, I actually like to have this on, especially if it's going to analyze like sentiment analysis stuff that comes back or JSON data, right? This is going to be very helpful if you're going to be working with anything that is like structured data that might need to be able to broken down into smaller atomic pieces when it's analyzed. So I keep that on almost every time, right? So the other stuff, it's sort of like, it depends on what I'm doing, but code interpreter, I just keep it on. Any question about, yes, Honorio?
I was just going to ask you, this is a custom GPT, so if you get the web search or you turn on those capabilities, does it charge you more? Or?
No.
Okay, so you
Nope.
use those,
Not in OpenAI's custom GPT interface. You pay $20 a month for Plus or $30 or whatever it is for Team, and you just make your custom GPT, and yeah, you get this stuff. It's all included.
Okay.
That's a good question. Whereas, using the API and the assistance API or even chat completions, you're going to be like if you want to go search the web, you got to go and do that, right? I think it might have an option for it now, but like you kind of have to do stuff with code, which I actually don't mind at all, right? Because it's a little more controlled. But this is like, hey, whatever they include, hey, you get your 20 files. It's not more money. It's just whatever it is, right? Okay. So, yep. Yeah, it's not metered at all is the point. Any other questions on capabilities? So even though I got this to work one of the 2 times I ran it, I'm still going to show you kind of like the process of creating an action, right? So this is the process of creating an action that is going to reach out to an API depending on if it needs that API, right? So how you do this is you need to have an open API schema, and you can convert pretty easily. You can convert like Swagger to this or anything where you've got a spec. Even if you just have JSON and you know which verb you're using, right? You could say post, and here's my input JSON, and here's my output. And you can use, my point is, you can use ChatGPT to generate this spec, and that is in my GitHub repository. I actually show you how to do that. I think OpenAI even has like a custom GPT now to do that for you. I don't like using a custom GPT unless I have to, like somebody else's custom GPT, unless I have to use it. So for me, I just use my own little chat thing. But it is helpful to be able to like take this spec, right, this API spec, and all right, I need to generate something that's going to work in these actions. So you can import from a URL if you have like a Swagger URL, swagger.json, right? Like this should work with all of that. They also have some examples, which is kind of nice. And this is just OpenAI is going to use this then to understand how to work with whatever API you're trying to connect. And at the bottom I showed earlier, it actually creates whichever actions are available with the API spec that you provided. So for me, I only wanted to use Deepgram's transcription API and nothing more and nothing less. So I provided it just the spec of that functionality, and I just grabbed that from Deepgram's documentation, like their API doc. So one other thing, which is kind of interesting, is this privacy policy here, it'll search for that automatically, but you can also, if it's buried under some weird URL, like you could put Deepgram's privacy policy in here because OpenAI can be finicky about that. Sometimes I have to put it in, and other times I don't have to put it in, right? So that's that stuff. Now, here's one interesting thing. Depending on what API you're connecting to, they're all going to have a little bit different authentication, right? So Deepgram specifically, I have to set, this is going to be header auth, right? And I have to set the authorization, and Deepgram, if you choose to use it, which it's a great API, I'm going to mention that here in your API key, you actually have to put in the word token with an uppercase T space, so not bearer, or what you might normally see, but it's literally token space, and then whatever your Deepgram key is. So if you want to try out Deepgram like with custom GPT, that's just a tip that will save you time. That's also, I think, in the GitHub repo that I created around this too. So just keep that in mind. And I think that's it for actions. There's one other thing that I'll mention, which is whenever the custom GPT is going to call an action, it's going to ask you, hey, do you really want to do this, right? Because it knows APIs are going to probably charge you something. So it'll say, hey, this is going to reach out to Deepgram right now. Are you sure? Do you want to do this? Confirm or not, right? And so it gives you the option when you run your chat through the custom GPT, do you really want to do this? So you understand like which APIs are going to be called at which times, right? So, and that is actions. Any questions on actions? Yes, Godfrey.
Can you do actions in assistance yet, or is it only in custom GPTs?
It's only in custom GPTs, but you can do what are called functions, which are like structured, hey, I want my code to do this type of thing, but you don't have, I do wish they had that. That would be pretty cool. So what Godfrey's asking is, hey, when I'm gonna transfer over to showing you the assistance in just a second here too, and kind of work through OpenAI's playground. He was asking, hey, it's got, files, it's got the instructions, so it's got the other pieces, but does it have the ability to create an action and have it automatically trigger all within that like OpenAI assistance library or API? The answer I think is no. We'll figure that out in just a minute though, Godfrey. I feel like I looked at it just the other night and it still wasn't there, but I do think about that. I'm like, that would be cool. So you just have to tie that together. Like the example I'm going to give you is I'm using something. Does anybody know what N8N is? Just raise your hand if you know what N8N is. Okay, cool. So N8N is a low, no code workflow builder, and it's kind of cool. I built this in such a way that I can show you the workflow running that hits these assistants in the chat completion, just so you see like, okay, there's a step 1 and now it's running, now it turns green, right? So we'll walk through that in just a minute. Not something, it's probably out of the scope of the talk going deep into N8N, but it's just more for illustration. And I'll tell you, N8N, if you don't, most people here probably are coders, right? But if you want to just kind of experiment and you don't have as much experience with coding, these low code, no code solutions can be kind of nice just to like, okay, now I'm going to do this. Now I'm going to add a chat conversation with OpenAPI or OpenAI rather. Okay, so I think that's it for the custom GPTs from ChatGPT. Any other questions about anything related to custom GPTs within ChatGPT? Okay, cool. So we're going to move on. Okay, now this is where it gets fun. So OpenAI, so there's a login for ChatGPT, which Honorio, because I think you touched on it earlier, hey, do they charge me more if I use whatever service, right? And so ChatGPT, that login is not metered. It's whatever you're paying for, whatever tier, right? Are you paying for Plus? It's $20. If you're paying for Team, it's $30. There's a Pro version that's $200 a month. I don't have that. I don't even have that. I'd rather just code some things together and play around. But anyway, so with this side of the house, right, OpenAI's API, this is a whole different login. And it's just platform.openai.com. And you can create a login here. And then you need to actually put money into your account, and then it'll just use that money, right, based on your usage, right? So and I'm going to mention, this is all kind of at a premium. I don't generally go over $5 a month. I'm being completely honest, even when I'm hitting it really hard, especially with like ChatGPT Mini, which is much more cost efficient. So I don't spend a lot of money on this, but each of the things, like when you add a file, right, that actually costs money when you're using the OpenAI side of the house. It's got to vectorize it. You've got a file storage. There's a cost. There's a cost every time you access it, right? So just know that the different pieces you add here, Honorio, each little bit is going to charge. Their usage charts show you exactly what you're getting charged for each piece. So you could run a couple calls and understand exactly what you're paying for, I guess is the point, right? So there are a few different pieces before I get into assistance here. So you've got, the playground is actually a pretty cool place to kind of get started and proof something out, right? This is the closest thing you're gonna find to the ChatGPT interface, but you can experiment and build your own little APIs and then access them from outside of the playground, or you can access them here in the playground till you get it right. And that's most of the time what I'll do. So I'll actually create, so there's, we can do chat, which is, these are chat messages, and I mentioned the system message. So I could put my system message in here. One thing that's really cool, and it won't have anything here, I don't think, just the basic, but if you go to code, it'll actually give you your the example for your exact stuff you've built in Playground. And I'll usually do this stuff here first, take that Python code, put that into my actual code as a function, right? Or a set of different functions, and I'll just use it like that because it's just so easy to like quickly like, all right, I'm not gonna mess the parameters up because they're gonna do the parameters for me, right? So it's an easy thing, just a mental cognitive overhead. You don't have to think about it as much. But here, you can look at this code. Let me see if I can make this a little bigger. So, and this is how you call from the API, right? This is the chat completions, right? So this is a chat back and forth conversation, and the messages would go in here if we actually had some. You could do system messages, user messages, and I think it's agent or assistant messages, where that's like you can emulate the OpenAI chat conversation. So Honorio, if you had good examples of, hey, this was where you nailed it, you could actually embed that right into the code here and do it there, right? So you don't even have to do it outside of that. And somebody mentioned temperature, right? This is where you can define temperature. And then if we go over to assistance, which is the other thing we're looking at, and I'm gonna make this a little smaller now. This is the custom GPT that I built with a few tweaks, just because I'm not in the ChatGPT interface and it's gonna be slightly different. I'm gonna be passing, instead of passing a URL directly into this tool, I'm passing the transcript that I've gotten back from Deepgram, and I'll show you the 1, 2, 3 step process, right, in a minute. But if I wanted to test this out, so this is the pre-transcribed text, and I could go and I could run, and just to let you know, so here's the system instructions, right? We had the custom instructions in the custom GPT. It's very similar, right? This is going to function very similar to that. These are the system instructions. You could even use ChatGPT to generate it. If you just have a rough idea of what you want, you can get started. I'm not going to do this because it'll overwrite what I have, but you click generate, it'll give you a text box. You could say, hey, I kind of want an assistant that does this thing, right? And boom, generate, and it'll generate you a rough outline of what it believes you want. And it's not that great, I'm just going to be honest, but it can be helpful to get you past the blank screen, right? And give you some ideas. So here I'm saying, hey, the standard input's going to be a transcript of a call. The output it's going to be the same thing, right? The HTML, I want Tailwind in there to make it a little prettier than just, Times New Roman, and it goes through and talks about what that output should look like. And then here, I've already added those 2 files that I showed you earlier. I already added them, but to add a file, you just click this plus files, and then you go pick the file from your desktop, and somebody's point earlier, it'll vectorize that file, right? And then it can access the file when it believes it needs it, right? So, and in the instructions, you can put in there, hey, use this file, right? But if you're doing that, I would say think about maybe that's something that could just be in the instruction, right? Is my normal thought when I get there. So we've got the file search is turned on, code interpreter. You could turn this on, and you could also give it some different files. In this case, my file search is good enough. I already have the 2 files that I needed vectorized, so I actually don't have code interpreter on. And then functions, this is where, and actually it's pretty good at generating functions if you want it to do something like, hey, I want my output to be like this, and there's like an if, there's some different branch logic. You can actually say, hey, I want this, give me the branch logic. When it's this type of thing, when it's a voicemail, right, do this, right, judge it differently. When it's not a voicemail, judge it, like you'd normally judge a call. So you can build in some logic. This generate is really great. I use this all the time when I'm generating these functions because dude, I don't want to have to remember exactly all of that syntax. It's super fast to just get it done. And I haven't had it, like it does a pretty good job. You can do the, so a couple of things here. So you could choose your model. I tend to use GPT-4o Mini. It's very inexpensive and it's accurate. Like I've tried 4o, I've tried some of the other stuff, the reasoning, and honestly, this gets it right. Like I said, most of the time I don't have a problem. Even in production, this is the type of model that we're using, and we're not having any issues, right? So this gives you some of the older models, right? Like with maybe bigger context windows, but older tech. So you could choose that. Again, my go-to is just GPT-4o Mini. That works good enough for me most of the time. And then with the response format, depending on what model you've chosen and your other settings here, you can choose text. You could use, I think the other option is JSON, and I think those might be the only two options. But let's say you want it to output Markdown. In your custom instruction, just put I want you to output Markdown, just like I said I want it to be HTML, right? So you can really tell it exactly what you want. You can set your temperature, your top P, and this API version, I don't know, it's not, there's just nothing there. Whoever asked about it being able to add actions, I don't think so. I don't think that's part of it yet. But can you though? I don't know if you can. I don't think you can. I think this is just internal functions that guide your thing. I don't think it can go outside of its own sandbox in the function. But I could be wrong on that. That's a good one to test, Godfrey. We'll have to touch base over that beer you owe me. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and run this, right? I've got my transcript. I already transcribed it through Deepgram. So I hit this, and this creates a thread, okay? And what's really, really cool about this playground, and so there we go. There's my output of my HTML file. It's doing its thing. What I really love is this logs. The logs gives you like every API call and what the responses were. So this is super helpful to be able to like, oh, okay, when I do that programmatically, I need to do this, then I need to do this, then I need to do this, right? Or with some tools like N8Ed, some of that can be baked in there, and I'll show you that in just a second here. So this is the assistant way to get things done, right? We can add files, we can do code interpreter, we can do the functions, right? And that's the assistant side of OpenAI, building assistants that you can hit via API. We're going to talk about chat completions in a second here, and then I'll show you an example of both of those. We'll run through it. Does anybody have any questions about assistants? I have one more thing to say about it, but if there are any questions, I'll take those first. Yes? It goes by the model. So whatever the model's context window is, it's going to have the same context window as its model. Does that make sense? So if you're choosing like GPT-4o Mini has a different context window than GPT-4o or GPT-3.5. And I'll show you right here. This might be small in the back, but like this right here is GPT-3.5 Turbo with a 16K context window. So it's all about which model you choose for your assistant. That's what determines your context. Does that make sense? Okay, cool. Any other questions? Yeah, Dustin.
How much context do you choose?
I'd say that the like less than the 16K is generally just fine, right? And even with some of these bigger calls, if you're just putting the transcript in, it's more than enough a lot of times. What's cool about this is it actually shows you how many tokens. So we could actually look at this, right? Like this particular one, this is 3,125 tokens for that like 7-minute call. That's a long transcript, right? So this still only used 3,000 tokens, right? So I don't, unless I'm doing like a book or something, I don't run into problems unless I'm doing some massive set of text, generally.
So for the context, does that have one-to-one with the tokens? Or would
No, you're gonna have an input and an output. So that's good to think about too. So this is a thread which can have multiple messages, right? So if I reuse this thread 100 times, right? I'm probably not gonna fall within my same context window. But what I generally do is I make an API call. Like in the case that I'm doing here that I'll show in a minute in N8N, I do use the same thread ID, but most of the time I just don't. I just say, hey, create a new thread, do a run on that thread with this user message, and it ends up being within, I like things in small atomic units rather than trying to do, unless I need to do a bunch of, hey, it has to have this memory in this context. I generally don't. Now, tools like N8N and like LangChain's another example of this. Who knows what LangChain is? Okay, so about like half the room. So LangChain is a framework. I'll call it a framework. There's probably a better name for it. But it's a framework really for building out flows that you're going to use, generative AI in, right? So if you've got, you build these in Python, or I think TypeScript and JavaScript. I think they have all three flavors of that. And this is like, okay, it's kind of a framework to get things done that gives you some tools, right? They're tools. Like one of the tools is, hey, how am I going to access memory, right? To your point, Dustin, I do want to mess with the book, right? And I want to break it down into fragments. And I want to make sure all that is logically stored and processed in this way. That's when a tool like LangChain, or you can use other memory managers. N8N has a memory tool that you just connect to your assistant. And then you can deal with those longer context windows where you will go out of bounds, right? Books, you're going to, like a whole operations manual. If I were trying to do that, that's very likely going to go out of bounds. So you've got to break that up. And there are tools in LangChain and in N8N and other places, right? These other tools have like, okay, use your assistant. You need memory, great. Here, set it up, right? It's pretty basic. Does that make sense? Okay. Does that make sense to everybody else? Anybody have any questions on that, on the memory? Okay. All right, so now I am going to move over to N8N. So I'm going to try and make this a little bigger just so people can see it. So this is that tool, N8N. Again, it's a low-code, no-code workflow builder. I've got a few steps here. The first one is I've got a form, which is where I'm going to paste my URL. And then the second step is I'm going to transcribe, right? I'm going to reach out to, in this case, same place I reach out in my custom GPT, which is Deepgram, and I'm going to do some transcription. Then with the output of that, I'm going to use OpenAI's messaging assistant or message assistant, and I'm going to put my, my prompt in, right? This may, let me see, I can't make this bigger, sadly. Sorry about that. But I'm saying, hey, I want to use this assistant, which is my half-full bottling, call coach, right? Which is the one that I just showed you. Oh, I guess it can get bigger. It was just kind of frozen. And, I want to use a specific thread ID, which is what I'm going to do now. I'm actually going to take this thread ID so you can see it's basically right at the top of where I did my run. So you've got the notion of an assistant. You got the notion of a thread, right, which can contain multiple messages. And then you have the messages that are in that thread. And then you have a run, like, hey, run it. Actually process and infer my thing and give me an output. So those are kind of the different pieces of the assistant flow. And this is a quick one. This is asynchronous. So if you're writing Python code or N8N handles it for you, but this is going to be an asynchronous process. So you're going to hit that and say, create the thread, add the message, do the run, but it's not going to come back to you right away. It could take 10 seconds, 30 seconds, whatever it is. So you have to put some sort of a poll in and say, okay, wait till that thread or that run is processed. Okay, great. The run ID is processed. Great. Give me my output. And like I said, if you use a tool like N8N, it does that for you. LangChain, I don't think it has an innately, but Python, you can just build a nice, quick little while loop or whatever it is, right? And just check it. Okay, now we're good. And you can use ChatGPT to generate the code to do that, by the way. It does it really well, and it's very simple. So as far as, figuring out that flow, you can see it right here in the logs. These are the different pieces, right? I created my thread. I added a message to my thread. It gives me my response, and then I run my thread. And then down here, see how it shows like, okay, the event was, hey, this run is in progress. This run is created. This run is, step in progress. So if you hit the API a second time and ask about that run, it'll tell you, hey, it's in progress, or hey, here, it's done. Grab your output, right? And then you could see that run completed at the very bottom there, which gives you your data output, I believe. Yes. I don't know where it is in here. It's a massive output, but it's definitely in there. And so I'll move this logs back over, and then you could see here, right, we got our HTML, right? So this was my message. It was just the transcript, nothing more, nothing less. And then I've got my HTML output here. And you could see, right, it used, just like I told it to, it said, okay, tailwind from the CDN. And I will tell you, again, this isn't perfect. Sometimes that URL for the CDN to tailwind isn't right. Most of the times it's right, right? So I'll go ahead and we'll take this thread ID, and I'm going to go back over to N8N. I'm going to paste that thread ID in there. And then I'm going to exit out of that. I'm going to make this big enough or small enough that you could see the whole thing. Right now it's green because I tested it, right? So I can hit this little trash can. Everything is gray. Now I'm ready to run. And so I just hit test workflow. I've got a URL. I submit my form. It starts to execute, right? It submits the form. It takes the form URL. It transcribes it. It just finished up that process. Now it's going out to OpenAI. It's doing the message in that thread. And then in a minute here, it's going to drop into this code block. And this code block, all I'm doing is just, it'll give you like the 3 backticks HTML and then the 3 backticks sometimes, not all the time, but even if you tell it not to, a lot of times it'll do that. So I just parse that out with a regex, and I say, just give me only the HTML. Like I want only the HTML. And then the last thing we do here is we publish this to a GitHub account, a repo that I have as a new report, which I'll show you where that goes in just a second here. Yeah, I'm just going to show you the example because these are all about the same. One thing that I realized recently is GitHub, you used to be a lot easier to like just host files on GitHub. Now they have this and view them as HTML. You could still do that with this HTML preview.github.io. I hope maybe everybody in this room knows that. I didn't know that till like maybe a week ago or two, and because I just hadn't had a need. But when I was building this out, I needed a way to do that. So this is my URL to that particular report, right? I paste it onto this starting URL here, and it just goes, takes the HTML, renders that for me in the browser. So now I can take a look. I say, okay, I know we walked through this, right? What'd the agent do? What'd they do great? And ChatGPT is or OpenAI is pretty good at like using emojis if you tell it to add emojis and whatnot, and not for just for fun, but like for functional purposes, right? Like green check and the different things. So that can be nice to add some color to these. Like the report that I built at Clarity looks much nicer than this. This is just something very basic that took a few minutes, right? So this is just a tip with ChatGPT or AI tools. I took the JSON from the output of my assistant because I have that particular assistant doing JSON output, and I said, build me a UI in Tailwind around this data, like around this JSON. did a dang good job in a few minutes of building me something that was like almost, I had to tweak it for like half an hour afterwards, right, to make it like, okay, this is what I would sell to a customer. But it was really quick at like just taking JSON, creating me, okay, here's your framework for what that looks like in HTML that would render this JSON in a nice way. So that's just a quick tip. Any questions on that method? So assistance, if you have any little questions, again, it's probably a little bit out of scope, but if you have any questions on N8N, that's fine. There's still more time, a little more time. Does anybody have any questions?
Is that form submission part of N8N?
Yeah, it's part of N8N, yep. So you can use something like Typeform or any of the, it integrates with most of the form, like Jotform and whatnot. But I just normally, if I'm testing something out, I just use N8N's form. It's pretty basic, but it's enough, right? So yeah, and I'll just run that again to show you. You could also set off authentication on this, right? So that not just anybody can hit this form and start submitting stuff to your workflow. So this does have authentication on it. I've just already authenticated. I did that earlier. So, and this is just a single form field, but you could have a form that has multiple files and a bunch of different stuff. So you could build out some semi-complex forms, kind of like what you could do probably in Streamlit, if you've ever heard of Streamlit. So. Yes, Dustin?
So if you wanted to do voice, audio stuff, you could use like the Azure sentiment analysis and then just kind of combine that.
Absolutely, right. So taking the, combining this with different services. I mean, even OpenAI is getting more and more functionality every day, right, with text-to-speech and speech-to-text. So, absolutely, if you had tonal sentiment analysis, a service that would do that, you could absolutely just, boom, tie that in. It would give you the tones, right? Then you could feed it into the assistant, and you could even say to the assistant, hey, make sure you pay attention to the tones, right? And that would dial your call assistant or your QA analysis in even more. So that's a great point, Dustin. Yep. Yes.
So does this support only like asynchronous workflows, or could you use this like live with somebody else?
So, yeah, I'll show you that. I'll show you the synchronous workflow next. Okay. So I built out, because I thought to myself, I only use the assistants if I need the file piece and the other like extra stuff. Most of the time, a really nice system prompt, which is again the first prompt in your set of chat messages, is perfectly enough. I'll show you the example of that right now. That's a great question. Let me go over here. So I'm going back over to the playground. This exists in the same spot. I go over to chat. So what's really great is I could actually go take my assistant. I can take my system instructions. It's literally the same thing. They call them system instructions here because it's the system prompt, right? So I copy exactly that to my clipboard. I go over here. I click into my system message, and I pop that in, right? So that, again, I like to use Markdown for this so that it's structured. I can define my inputs. I can define my outputs. And this is no snuff. Like, it's got stuff that you can add in here, right? Like, I can do JSON object as my output. I can use my different models similar to what we just saw in the other one, right? And actually, I think this might even have more model selection. We'll just use 4.0 mini because that's what I used before. But let's say I'm not going to do a JSON object as output because I like the HTML file. But we could add a function if we wanted to further customize the output based on, let's say, whether it was a voicemail or whether it was this type of call, right? So you could detect that stuff and use functions to sort of route that logic. Temperature, same thing, right? Excuse me, what I really like here is I could actually set my max tokens. So if I want something that's like super verbose, I just slide it all the way over here. It's gonna cost more money, but with this model, it's very inexpensive. And I just don't run into really any issues. So I'll just, hey, YOLO it, right? I don't know what stop sequences are, I'll be honest. That's something that I may need to look at and add. But looking at the model configuration, I want to take that temperature down to 0.0, like, hey, don't be creative in this. Like, make sure you're very precise. So I'm going to do that. Then I'm going to go back over where I have my transcript. So we'll test this, right? I always test in the playground because it's just easier to figure out if I have a problem there. And so then I put my user message in. Oh, and this is kind of cool. You could actually select, hey, this is the user message, which is like my input, or assistant is, hey, I want to emulate the like ChatGPT talking back to me, so that to your point, Honorio, maybe I want to fine tune and I want to get this started with, hey, I gave you this, you gave me this wonderful output. I gave you this, you gave me this wonderful output. All right, great. Now I'm going to give you this third thing, and it's got that context from those previous two outputs that will make it better, right? So that's how you could do that. So for ours, we're just going to do user. I'm going to paste this in here, and I'm going to do this run. Now, to your point, this now is synchronous. This will run, and then when it's done, it's going to give me an output, and I can go run that in N8N, and it doesn't have to pull and wait. It just, when it's done, right? So I hit run. Oh, I know what I did. I actually built out the system message in N8N because it allows you to do that. So it's just calling this same API, which is called the Chat Completions API, with a system prompt that's very similar to this, right? So I've got my user prompt here. It tells me how many milliseconds it took. It talks about, it's got a request ID, so you can go back and reference that. That's all transcript. And then here we go, right? It gives me exactly what I wanted, which is, it gave me my backticks and my HTML, but that's cool. I could strip it just after, and it gave me that HTML that's gonna come out, and it's gonna look something that looks similar to this, right? Now that I've done that, and what's really cool about this is you can look back at your history and figure out what you've run, and I can go, like if I had 5 of these in here, I could click here and it would show me exactly what I put in there. So even if you go and you can clear this, it doesn't clear your history, it just clears what's currently in that chat playground, so you can go and experiment. You can also save this as a preset. For some reason I don't see this right. Oh, there it is, save as preset. It's down at the bottom. So I could say, I'll just say call coach. You can put a little description. Great, now I have a preset, and then I can come up here and I can actually now select call coach, or if I had 10 different ones that it was like, okay, I want to like do this, and you know, I could switch between them really quickly. So another great thing about this particular API, it's even better than the other one with, you know, the threads and everything. Not that that's worse, it's a different case, right? It's a different set of needs, but this one will give you all of the Python code, or I think there's like 4 different, yeah, so they have Node, they have the curl, right? Which curl you can take a lot of times and put into other things, and it'll generate you know, .NET if you want .NET, right? So this gives you that Python code for exactly how you've set that chat up. It gives you that Python output for that. So last but not least, I'm going to run that same workflow, but I'm going to use this. This is my chat completions demo, so it's going to be very similar to the other one. And I'm just going to hit test workflow. I'm going to put my call URL in there. So same workflow. On my part, it's the same. I hit that. It does its thing. It transcribes it just like before. That's exactly the same. The only difference here in N8N is that I'm using chat completion. See how it's going to take a minute here? And that's just one synchronous, to your point, Dustin, one synchronous run. When it comes back, it comes back. It's taking a second here. That's fine. Sometimes it does. And then it's going to drop it into the next node there, which is the code node. That does exactly the same thing. It pulls out the HTML. It then publishes that particular report up to GitHub with the date, right, and some sort of a unique thing. This is taking a little longer than normal. I'm not sure what's up here, but it is what it is. While we're waiting for this, questions?
You mentioned that this is in production.
Oh yeah, so it's done now. Just as a quick thing. So yes, yeah, something like this is in production. Yes, exactly. The same idea, but it's built with open source models, and it's different than this. I'm not using OpenAI because as much as I love OpenAI, I don't really want for one, it's very expensive, right? It can get very expensive. So we're hosting our own versions on AWS and just using our own models, both for the transcription. We don't use Deepgram in production. It's really expensive. It would cost us like $50K a month, I think, if we transcribe through Deepgram each month. And it costs us like maybe $4K a month to do it through our own version of Whisper and AWS, right? So, so the whole infrastructure and setup is different, but it's the same idea and concept.
And do you like just automate it, like where?
Yeah, it's absolutely automated. We actually have the ability at Clarity to virtualize every conversation. So this is the call detail, the recording, and then anything you could do past that. So transcription, sentiment, an AI analysis, red flags, and all the other different things. So we're just doing that on every phone call, actually, as long as the customers are opted in. And then they reap the benefits because we can use generative AI to then give them those analysis. Hey, what topics are people talking about? What are the intents? What are your best, agents doing today? Literally, because the thing is, like, what works today, as we all know, it might not work tomorrow. That's why scripts, a lot of times, they're good, but people are talking about different things. Oh gosh, the wildfires are happening, like that's not going to be in a script. But if you're showing empathy as an agent and you're in California, well, you might want to talk about that and get some sort of a conversation going. So being able to use generative AI on that set of virtualized conversations, they're all segmented, right? By brand, by customer, all in their own little sandboxes. It really gives you the power to do whatever you want, right? To Dustin's point, you could do tonal sentiment analysis, right? So it is very powerful.
So do you have a contact center?
What's that?
A contact center?
Yes, yeah, we have a contact center as well, and all of those conversations are also virtualized. Yep. So Facebook, your CRM, WhatsApp, Telegram, there's like a bunch of different channels, right? Email, text messaging, even Google reviews is essentially a channel where you can tie a customer to a set of conversations. So this is just tiny in comparison to like what we're doing. We're doing it at scale at Clarity, right? So yeah, it's like a whole different thing. But it started with this, right? So, and this was compelling enough and interesting enough to like, okay, let's try this out. Single every call, hey, you want an analysis on your call and you don't want to listen to it and you don't want to have to read it, hit the button and try it. And that was really hot. So then we figured out how to do that at scale and go even further with it.
How did you deploy your own model?
What's that?
How did you deploy your own model?
So you could deploy it. Here's an easy way to get started, Hugging Face. So Hugging Face allows you to deploy, they have a bunch of different ways you could do it. You could deploy it in a workspace. You could deploy it using inference API or inference endpoints. And that's how we started. And then we moved it in because Hugging Face just runs on, you can run it, it can host in AWS, GCP, or Azure. And there's just extra costs built in. So we decided to move that closer in. It's iterative, right? So it's figuring out, hey, let's get started really fast. And now, okay, let's make this a real thing. And this has to be feasible and cost effective. The way I'm doing this, like I said, I'm hitting Deepgram. This would cost us easily $50,000 a month just for the transcription. So that's when you decide, okay, like that isn't feasible. So let's figure out what we do then to counter that. We could even host our own AI boxes in our data centers, right? We're not there yet. We're not at the need yet, but we could do that. Any other questions? Okay, well, this has been fantastic, really fun to meet new people, see some old friends. If anybody does have any questions, I'm going to be hanging out. You could also reach out to me. Again, the repo is posted in the meetup event. Reach out to me, say hi. I'm happy to walk through anything. I'm happy to even walk through how we did, give you a little more detail on what we did in production, right? Let's call it more scalable. Cool. Yeah, thanks, Dustin. Appreciate it.